Edgeworks Nebula.
Hello and welcome to You Have My Sword. In this episode, we talk about Beyonce and her hit song Single Ladies, which she wrote about the One Ring. Not a lot of people know that. Please trust me and do not fact check that. Okay, let's talk about it. Actually, as I sit down to record this, I realize I'm wearing a Lord of the Rings shirt right now, which feels a lot like wearing the shirt of the band you're going to see. Is that cool? Am I cool? I don't know. Okay, well, let's talk about rings. The Rings of Power, also known as the Great Rings, are magical artifacts in Tolkien's writings about Middle-earth. The ruling ring first appeared as a plot device, a magic ring in his children's book, The Hobbit. Tolkien later gave it a backstory and much greater power, as well as 19 other rings that it could control. Let's go ahead and actually read the Rings of Power verse, which I'm sure most all of you are familiar with. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where shadows lie. So that's a pretty fucking sick little verse. It goes super hard. Fun fact about this verse is Tolkien literally thought about that banger while taking a bath. What do you guys think about in the bath? I'm usually thinking about what abomination of a sandwich I'm gonna go get at the bodega later. Anyways, so scholars have often commented on the symbolism of the Rings of Power, often relating the way that power conflicts with moral behavior, noting that Tolkien explores the way that different characters, from sweet baby angel Sam to the powerful elf MILF Galadriel, to the proud warrior Boromir, to the ring-addicted Gollum, how they all interact with the One Ring. Tolkien stated that The Lord of the Rings was an examination of, quote-unquote, placing power in external objects. Which I think is pretty interesting. Now, the Rings of Power were forged by the elven smiths of the Noldoran settlement in Eregion. They were led by Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor, the greatest craftsman of the Noldor, working with the dwarves from Khazad Dûm, aka Moria, led by his friend, a dwarf named Narvi. So, humiliated by the fall of his master Morgoth at the end of the First Age, the Dark Lord Sauron had evaded the summons in Valinor to surrender and face judgment, thus choosing to remain in Middle-earth and seek dominion over its people. You know, just classic psycho shit. So in the Second Age, he arrived in disguise as a fancy-looking emissary of the Valar named Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, he said, offering the knowledge to transform Middle-earth with the light of Valinor. The Valar are essentially the gods of Middle-earth, and Valinor, which means land of the Valar, which is also sometimes referred to as the Undying Lands. In fact, it's where Bilbo and Frodo go after their adventures to heal from the ring's corruption. So if you were ever like, why are they getting on that boat? Now you know, undoubtedly listening to Yacht Rock the entire way. Okay, so anyways, Sauron in disguise was shunned by the elven leaders Gil-galad as well as Elrond and Lindon, but managed to persuade the Noldoran elves in Eregion. So the leaders in Gil-galad and Elrond himself were both like, nah, dude, we're like super good on this. No, thank you. So Sauron made his way to the Noldoran elves, and they were kind of interested in what he was pitching. So with Sauron's help, they learned to forge Rings of Power, creating the 7 and the 9, while Celebrimbor created a set of 3 rings on his own, which would stay with the Elf Lords. Sauron then left for Mordor and forged the One Ring in secret, in the fires of Mount Doom. So let's talk a little bit about the One Ring first before we get into the other rings of power. Unlike the other rings of power, the One was created as an unadorned plain gold band, though it bore Sauron's incantation, sometimes called the Rime of the Rings in Black speech. It became visible only when heated, whether by fire or by Sauron's hand. The powers granted to the wearer of the One Ring were invisibility, extended lifespan, control, and knowledge of all other rings, but the effects on the bearer was corruption and evil. As the other rings were made under the influence of Sauron, the power of all the rings depended on the One Ring's survival. To make the One Ring, Sauron had to put almost all his power into it. When worn, it enhanced his power. Unworn, it remained aligned to him unless another seized it and took control of it. So what's interesting is a prospective possessor could, if sufficiently strong, overthrow Sauron and take his place, but they would inevitably become as evil as Sauron himself. So that is obviously essentially the curse of the One Ring. As the One Ring was made in the fires of Mount Doom, it could only be unmade there. Sauron, being both evil and an idiot, never imagined that anyone might try to destroy the ring, as he imagined that anyone bearing it would be corrupted by it. This motherfucker truly underestimated the purity of hobbits. The inscription on the ring read, and I'm going to try my best here, so feel free to roast me later, Ashnaz Durba Tuluk, Ashnaz Gimbatul, Ashnaz Tharak Tuluk, Ogburzum Ishi Krimpatul. Okay, I know I butchered that, but it is, kind of interesting and fun to hear. So, roughly translated, these words mean one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. These words were physically painful to any elves who heard them, as any words of Black speech were. When Gandalf recited these words at the Council of Elrond, the sky darkened and the elves were greatly and obviously pained. Next, let's talk about the 3 elven rings. Named after the 3 elements of fire, water, and air, the 3 were the last to be made. While Celebrimbor forged the 3 rings alone in Eregion, they were molded by Sauron's craft and were bound to the One Ring. After Sauron's defeat, when the One Ring was cut from his finger at the end of the Second Age by Isildur, did the elves begin to actively use the 3 rings to ward off the decay brought by time. The first of the 3 elven rings is Narya, the Ring of Fire, or the Red Ring. It was set with a ruby. Its final bearer was Gandalf, who received it from Círdan at the Grey Havens during the Third Age. Narya's unique power was the ability to rekindle hearts with its fire and inspire others to resist tyranny and domination. So, pretty sick shit. The second of the elven rings was Nenya, the Ring of Water, the White Ring, also known as the Ring of Adamant. Was made of mithril and set with a shimmering white stone. Galadriel used it to protect and preserve the realm of Lothlorien. Nenya had a secret power in its water that protects from evil. Galadriel revealed her possession of her ring to Frodo while he was in Lothlorien after he saw her ring. This is because of his possession of the One Ring. That was the only way he was able to detect that she was wearing it. Samwise even said he could not see a ring, but he saw a star-shaped hole in Galadriel's finger. So later, while traveling down the river Anduin, Frodo spoke of this to Aragorn, who admonished him not to speak of it outside of Lothlorien. Now, the third of the elven rings is Vilya, the Ring of Air, the Blue Ring, or the Dominant Ring. Was the mightiest of the 3 elven rings. It was made of gold and set with a sapphire. Elrond inherited Vilya from Gil-galad and used it to safeguard Rivendell. Vilya's unique ability was to heal and preserve wisdom within its element of air. So when Sauron laid waste to Eregion, Vilya, along with Narya, was sent to the Elven king Gil-galad far away in Lindon, as Gil-galad was the High King of the Noldor elves at the time of the ring's distribution. It was thought that he was best fit to care for the most powerful of the 3 elven rings. After his death in the War of the Last Alliance, the ring passed to Elrond, who bore it throughout the Third Age. The Elven Ring's powers were to heal and protect overall. There was a sense of purity to all 3 of the Elven Rings, and from what I understand, had no negative status effects on the wearer, likely because they were made without Sauron's direct involvement. The coolest thing about the Elven Rings, in my opinion, is that the whereabouts of the 3 were not openly revealed until the end of the Third Age, after the One Ring was destroyed and Sauron was overthrown. These rings themselves are invisible instead of making the wearer invisible like the rest of the rings that were forged with Sauron's influence. So I find that to be super interesting. Now let's jump into the 7 rings of the Dwarf Lords. Sauron presented the 7 rings to the Dwarf Lords. This might have been the division of 7 dwarf clans mentioned in the history of Middle-earth. The clan names are Durin's Folk, or Longbeards, Firebeards, Broadbeams, Iron Fists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots. And hey, guess what? A lot of you may know this about me already, but I fucking love the dwarves of Middle-earth. So we will dive deep into their particular lore clan by clan, obviously in its own episode. So the dwarves used their rings to establish their fabled treasure hoard, which in turn, unfortunately, attracted dragons. But Sauron, according to portions of the Silmarillion, was unable to force the dwarven bearers to submit to his will. The rings did not turn them invisible, and the dwarves were immune to some of the ring's more detrimental effects, truly just reinstating that the dwarves were some hard-headed motherfuckers. It is believed that the dwarves' natural hardiness and the fact that it was the more powerful of the dwarf lords who possessed the rings made them resistant to Sauron's control. Obviously, this was very frustrating to Sauron. While it is not directly stated, the rings presumably gave the dwarf lords who wielded them a greatly increased lifespan, and they presumably did not age. The net effect of these rings was to bring vast wealth to the wearer and cause them to become extremely greedy, which ultimately led to the wielder's ruin. At the time of the Lord of the Rings, 4 of the dwarven rings had been consumed by dragonfire, and then the rest were actually reacquired by Sauron himself. The mightiest of the 7 was possibly given to Durin III by Celebrimbor, although it had been made by Sauron, and was passed down from father to son until finally it was taken from Thrain II. Thrain was the father of Thorin Oakenshield II. Very confusing stuff here. Try to follow along as best you can. The dwarves kind of get a little crazy and all over the place. Thrain was the father of Thorin Oakenshield II and also the heir of Durin, who had been captured, imprisoned, and tormented by the Necromancer, which, again, was Sauron in disguise. Durin's ring was handed down his line, father to son, until it ended up with Thror, grandfather of Thorin Oakenshield. He entrusted the ring to his son Thrain before wandering into orc-occupied Moria and being beheaded by Azog. Now, Azog was an orc chieftain of Moria who started the War of the Dwarves and Orcs when he slew Thror. Azog was then slain by Dain II of the Ironfoot clan and was succeeded by his son Bolg, who was also a bitch baby. In response to his father's death, Thrain led Durin's folk to war against the orcs in Moria. This war culminated in the Battle of Azon-Nulbazar, which is the battle that is portrayed in flashbacks in the film The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. So he went slightly insane after this and wandered off towards Erebor. Now it turns out that he was captured and imprisoned in Dol Guldur. Gandalf encountered him in the dungeons of the Necromancer, where he learned that Sauron had, kind of finessed the ring off of him. Gandalf goes on to say, "Balin will find no ring in Moria. Thor gave it to Thrain, his son, but not Thrain to Thorin. It was taken with torment from Thrain in the dungeons of Dol Guldur. I came too late. So, unfortunate stuff. So again, 4 rings lost to Dragonfire, and then the rest Sauron had finessed off the Dwarven lords. Also, now it is like becoming very clear to me that Sauron loved to wear disguises, apparently. I just picture him in like a bad party city wig with bangs he cut himself, in those glasses with like the fake nose and eyebrows attached. And he's just like, Dark Lord? I don't know her. So this man fucking loves a disguise. So, shortly before the outbreak of the War of the Ring, Sauron's envoy approached Dain II Ironfoot in the Lonely Mountain and offered to return the 3 surviving rings to the dwarves if they would help find the One Ring. Dain refused, knowing from the dwarves' long experience that Sauron was clearly untrustworthy. They were like, no, bitch, what the fuck? You are gonna roll up to our halls of stone with the worst trade deal of all time? Get the fuck out of here. So, again, between dragons nuking 4 of the rings and Sauron finessing the last 3 from the dwarves, this left the dwarves ringless. Okay, now we get to talk about men, unfortunately. The 9 rings for mortal men were divided amongst those men doomed to become the Nazgul, or ring wraiths. These ring bearers held rings that were under control of Sauron, thus they became evil servants to him. None are mentioned specifically throughout the Lord of the Rings, save their leader, the Witch King of Angmar. His second in command was named in Tolkien's Unfinished Tales as Khamûl, the Black Easterling. The line from Tolkien's epigraph, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, refers to the fate of men uniquely among the creations of Eru, to pass beyond Arda to a destiny unknown to elves. It was this uncertainty and men's envy of elven immortality in the Blessed Realm, which is Valinor on the continent of Aman, which Sauron exploited, leading to the destruction of Numenor, which honestly is a lot to cover, so we will go deeper into these events in their own episode for sure. Okay, to keep it simple, the effects of the 9 rings on the men were that the bearers acquired great power and wealth. They became powerful sorcerers, this effect presumably ending when they became Nazgul, and appeared to have eternal or prolonged life. After a time, however, life became unendurable to them, and when they put the rings on, they often beheld the phantoms and delusions of Sauron himself. One by one, according to the nature of man and his innate inability to resist evil, they fell under Sauron's permanent control and became wraiths who did only Sauron's bidding. It's interesting to me that Tolkien wrote men as being inherently greedy and succumbing terribly to power because, I don't know, gestures broadly. It's just a classic tale of toxic masculinity ruins the party forever and always.
Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States.
Anyways, as fully corrupted Nazgul, they remained permanently invisible except to those elves who had once dwelt in the Undying Lands, which were very few by the Third Age. The Maiar, such as Sauron and the wizards, Gandalf and Saruman. They were also visible to whomever wore the ruling ring. Now, whether the other rings conferred this ability, as far as I know, is unknown. This process also appeared to link their lives and power with Sauron's, making them little more than extensions of his will. So when Sauron's power was weak, the wraiths themselves were also fairly powerless. As Sauron became stronger, however, they became much more powerful, to the point where the Witch King presumably able to match even Gandalf the White in strength, which is fucking insane, to be honest. Gandalf is truly that bitch. I fucking love him. If I had to create a Gauntlet Legend style adventure party with 3 characters, it would be Gandalf, Gimli, and Eowyn. Who would you guys pick? Actually, let me know online, or I won't be able to sleep. Thanks.
Please leave a message after the tone.
Okay, so anyways, now it is unclear where the 9 rings were physically kept. At the Council of Elrond, the history of the Rings of Power is discussed, and it is stated that Sauron has, quote unquote, gathered the nine to himself. Although it is also said that the nine the Nazgul keep. This could mean either that the Nazgul wear the rings while in the service of Sauron, or it could mean that after they fell and became enslaved to his will, that Sauron took their rings and kept them in Barad-dûr, as he did with the remaining dwarf rings, and set the Nazgul to guard them. There is no mention of any of the nine when the Nazgul are seen, and most notably when the Witch King was slain, Tolkien does not describe him wearing a ring, nor did Gandalf or Aragorn express concern about what happened to the ring afterwards. This kind of implies that at the very least the Nazgul don't wear the rings consistently, although they may sometimes still put them on, which feels interesting to me. They don't need to wear them as they are fully corrupted by them, but they still like to flex, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, so that's essentially it for the rings, pretty much. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a quick rundown on all of the rings. A lot of people I talked to about Lord of the Rings seem to think that the ruling ring is the only ring, so I think talking a little bit about the other rings is pretty interesting. Again, I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, that's okay, but keep that shit to yourself. Your homework after this episode is to Google artwork of all the rings, as there is a lot of really cool fan art of how the rings could have looked, and even some really dope jewelers out here making super sick replicas. And again, please check out youhavemyswordpodcast.com for all of our social media links and the link to our Patreon if you would like to support this madness. And again, I would like to shout out another creator for you all to check out. They go by Wizard Way Chris, K-R-I-S, on their socials. Follow them on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Their TikTok content is incredible. Chris goes into great detail to explain and teach Elvish. Their videos has absolutely helped me understand Elvish so quickly. It's crazy. Please go show Chris some support. They are cute as a button and insanely talented and pronounce things better than I ever could hope to. Again, thank you for listening, and as always, you have my sword.
Edgeworks Nebula.